Peter King joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show, fresh off yet another must-read, fantastic edition of the MMQB at the MMQB.com. How are you, Peter?
Isn't Merrill Reese a treasure?
He is. I agree.
I love listening to that call. I love listening to his calls. I think he's so much fun. I think he mirrors Philadelphia in a lot of ways. I really like him.
Yeah. So what do we? I agree with you too. I mean, he's been there, done that. He's called games probably back to the, what would you say, the Vermeil era, right?
Yeah, definitely. Jaws all the way back
he's
then.
called them all, Peter. You know, he's one of the more indelible voices. What do you make of last night's victory for the Philadelphia Eagles over the Cowboys, Peter?
Well, I mean, you know, I think there's two lessons to take from last night. Number one, that that finally I was getting ready last night at some point. In fact, I had started to write something that okay, we've given Sam Bradford half a year, and I think he's deserved every bit of a half a year. If you haven't played for a year and a half, if you haven't played for whatever 22 months, whatever it was at the start of the season, I think it's fair to take a long time to get back into the swing. But I think last night showed that he, especially under some heat last night, late in the game, that he still has a chance to be the kind of quarterback that Chip Kelly thought he was trading for. That's number one. Number two, I think along with everybody else who watch football, I think we all thought that the Cowboys were going to steal one without Tony Romo. And you know what? They might steal one next week against Tampa. I don't know. They might steal one against the Dolphins. But, you know, the quarterback position has become so incredibly vital, and even more so, I think, than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. That the Cowboys, and I think so many teams would be in this boat. That Tony Romo has proven that if he's not the NFL's most valuable player, and I'm not one who can put a guy who's missed all but 2 games or whatever it is as the MVP, but he's certainly shown his value to this team.
Peter King joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. Let's touch on Greg Hardy before we move on to other things in the NFL. It was interesting to me that the touchdown pass, Greg Hardy came so close to getting Sam Bradford, and that might be the metaphor right here, is that Greg Hardy was on Carolina. They decided not to keep employing him anymore. They're undefeated. Cowboys decide to employ Greg Hardy. It still didn't wind up for a win for them last night. And there are people like me who believe he shouldn't be playing for the Dallas Cowboys. I've read what you wrote at MMQB. You are right. Greg Hardy has every right to be to work. But, does he have the right to be employed is what I'm saying.
Well, it feels that there's no question about it. But my whole point in what I wrote today is that I understand the outrage, and every bit of the outrage is deserved. I am repulsed by the guy. If I were an NFL owner and I desperately needed a pass rusher, a two-way defensive end, and I thought that was the difference between me going to the playoffs and being 7-9, and he was out there, I wouldn't touch him. I'd never sign him. But, Rich, I think the reason why I wrote what I wrote today is that I think an awful lot of the outrage we have is because we've seen the photos. We saw the video with Ray Rice, and we were absolutely outraged. We've seen the photos with Greg Hardy, and we're outraged. But there have been approximately 51 players who have been disciplined for domestic violence since the year 2000. And you cannot tell me that somewhere between a portion and a vast majority don't have or didn't do what these two guys did to the women in their lives. And yet the only reason that we're not outraged by Darrell Washington, by Philip Merling, by Ray McDonald to the same degree is because we haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet those guys went on and played football, and people said, well, that guy, Ray McDonald was a different story because it was a very public thing. But the vast majority of these cases, we don't get outraged by it. We just say, oh, well, he did his 2 games, now he's back. Hey, how you doing, Philip? I mean, that's what bothers me about this whole scenario. And so the fact that we're incredibly outraged by Ray Rice and then by Hardy, I think, honestly, I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but I do think that it's an inconsistency that I don't like. Now, the other thing involved here is that Hardy has been totally remorseless, and that drives people up a wall. It drives me up a wall, too. So while I have zero desire to see Greg Hardy play football, I also do not think that 32 NFL owners should be prevented from giving him a chance to play football.
I've got Peter King at SI_Peter King from Sports Illustrated and Football Night in America, the MMQB.com, joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. I want to play a soundbite for my audience and for you as well. This was Mike Zimmer after the game in which they beat the Rams in overtime after giving up the ball, by the way, after getting it in a coin toss. You talked about a lot of this today. But this was him about the LaMarcus Joyner hit on Teddy Bridgewater and who he was essentially blaming for it.
We're a disciplined football team. We do things right. That's why we lead that's why we are the least penalized team in the league, because we play by the rules. We continue to play by the rules. And just because other teams don't do it doesn't mean we're going to do it. I do know that there's a history there of their defensive coordinator. I'll leave it at that. I would say if we were out in the street, we probably would have had a fight.
Probably would have had a fight if there. And you spoke to him after the game. Was he still hot a couple hours later, Peter?
I wouldn't say he was hot. I would say that he was calm and reasoned and said to me, I just hope the league considers his history when they consider what, if anything, they're going to do in discipline. Now, I doubt sincerely that anything is going to happen to Greg Williams or to Jeff Fisher over the hit to Teddy Bridgewater, but I feel fairly sure that LaMarcus Joyner is going to get fined significantly. I doubt he's going to be suspended, in part because of his impassioned kind of plea after the game, which I thought was very heartfelt. And I'm not sure that he, I think from listening to him, I think he adamantly feels that it wasn't a cheap shot, and that he found out way too late that Bridgewater was sliding. In my opinion, it seems very, very hard to believe. It looked like a cheap shot to me, but I'm not in LaMarcus Joyner's skin. I called it a cheap shot today, and we talked about it last night, and I thought it was.
So, and Zimmer's decision to cough up the football in overtime, willingly give it to St. Louis to start. It's very rare to see that. I love these new overtime rules, Peter. We saw 2 walk-off touchdowns. We saw a team win by giving the ball away to start. And last week we saw the Panthers come up with the first ever overtime win by coming from behind in overtime. I love the new overtime rules.
Rich, you took the the topic for my Tuesday column right out of my computer. I started writing it early this morning right after I did this, but I said, that everybody who ripped the overtime rules, and look, I like the overtime rules and have liked them and was on board with saying you have to change them. I really like the overtime rules for a very, very simple reason. It was always unfair to only give one team the ball at the start of overtime. I still think there ought to be a guaranteed possession for the other team. But it's certainly significantly better if you mandate that the team that receives the ball score a touchdown rather than a field goal right away, or if the game ends on a safety, obviously. But I'll say one thing. What really impresses me about Mike Zimmer as a coach, there's been 530 overtime games in the 42 years since the NFL adopted overtime. This was the 11th time that a coach ever chose to take basically one side of the field. which is what he chose to do. You got to understand something. At the start of overtime, you don't defer, okay? If you choose to not receive the ball, you choose the side of the field that you want to defend, and you give the other team the ball. And I thought it was really smart, and it's so fitting that the only time that this has worked in recent years was by a guy who Zimmer brought up to me back in 2013. Patriots-Broncos, Thanksgiving weekend 2013, when Bill Belichick chose to hand the ball on a very windy day in Foxborough to Peyton Manning. And on the fifth possession of that overtime, the Patriots won by kicking the winning field goal. And so, look, I'm really impressed with Zimmer, really impressed with them. And, I mean, I'm a little bit stunned that we're at the season's midpoint and Green Bay and Minnesota are tied for the division lead, and Minnesota actually has the tiebreaker advantage.
And the last minute I have with you, and we are at the midway point, and we did just see Peyton Manning lose to Indianapolis, and we have now seen Carolina take a 2-game lead in the NFC. At the halfway point, who are your Super Bowl teams? You could take a mulligan from your preseason right now. Who do you think's playing in Santa Clara?
I guess I would take a mulligan because I picked the Ravens.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd obviously take the Patriots. I think they're the best team in football. I think it'll be a New England-Cincinnati championship game, which I think will be really cool and good for Andy Dalton to get the monkey off his back. And I'm going to say something that in the NFC right now, I'm going to pick the Seattle Seahawks. I think they're trending in the right direction. I think they're going in the right direction. I think they've spent a lot of this bye week trying to figure out how Russell Wilson doesn't get hit as much as he has. And so I think that I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb and take a Super Bowl rematch.
All right, Peter. Thanks for calling, and I appreciate it as always.
All the best, Rich. Thank you.
Same to you. The MMQB.com. Go ahead and read it. Go ahead and read it. Patriots, Seahawks.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.